and you'll see that pop up. And with that, I'm just going to share my screen and just walk through a little bit of the agenda for today, and then move on from there. And then Debbie, please feel free to, again, as we talked about, pop in, share your thoughts, and help with the discussion. So of course, welcome introductions. Like I said, we wanted to keep it pretty brief because we did have several things to go over. We first wanted to review the notes. We had some great feedback and notes from the last meeting. And based on those notes, we have some, basically we created a schedule and we want to meet monthly from here on out for the rest of the year. And we have a schedule of what would happen at each of those months, potentially. Definitely a lot of collaboration because some of those would include getting CARB on board to do some of the work. Some of it would include getting some input from different sources, and you'll see that in a moment here when I share my screen with the other piece of the notes. The other thing that we're going to do, and something we want to do every quarter, is review the quarterly enforcement report and maybe even get feedback on some of the information that we share in that report, something that we did actually at the last meeting as well. And then finally, one of the things that we got feedback on the last time that we wanted to get your thoughts on was someone asked that we put together sort of a quick sheet or some sort of guide on how to know what rules and regulations sources in the area are required to comply with, and kind of what all the different existing controls look like. We have that document. We actually included it in the SERP as sort of an attachment. It is really long. And so when we get to this, we won't have a lot of time to fully discuss it, but I wanted to introduce it to you, maybe get some first initial thoughts, and then we'll send it out to folks to get feedback. And what we could do is we can together, maybe each meeting, save some space to refine that document and then use that as our community facing document, understanding here's how to understand what rules and regulations that each source has to comply with and what those rules mean and kind of the history. That way folks can use it as a reference as we go through this. That was one of the asks. Any questions as to this, or maybe it makes more sense once we kind of dive into the notes? Cool. All right, so I'm going to quickly, we took it in a Jamboard. If you recall, we had a bunch of sticky notes. I'm just going to quickly look at this, but we summarize it on the next little slide here. And I can even share this with folks. I don't mind dropping this in the chat if you want to follow along, or you want to zoom in a little closer. I totally get it. So here on the left, we just listed the commitments in the SERP based on the CARB commitments for the regulatory and enforcement type things, the district commitments, and then the pink are all the notes we took last time. We talked about the purpose and the goals, and then we talked about what we could do to help meet the purpose and the goals. I'm going to zoom in a little bit because down here, all of the orange is what we aimed to do today, or at least share with you today. So just really briefly, folks were interested in a variety of things, so I'm not going to be fully comprehensive in what I'm going to summarize, but essentially folks were interested in using, maybe guided by the emissions inventory, meaning how emissions are coming off of certain sources. We could then kind of guide ourselves in a schedule throughout the year to deep dive into sources and dig into sort of the rules and regulations. And so we've done that. You'll see on the next slide our proposal, although we're open to feedback. This right here, oops, things are getting crazy. This sticky note right here was sort of, I think, what we're hoping to get out of that last piece of the agenda, which is a little handout about all of the rules and regulations that we can kind of use as a guide as we go through them. This note right here, we think can be addressed by our schedule that I'll share on the next screen, which is every time we bring up a certain rule or regulation, maybe bring the proper folks, whether it's from the district or from CARB, to help answer the questions, maybe the people who actually worked at that facility, they're the ones who did the inspection, or they're the ones who oversaw the rulemaking, or they're the ones who worked on the permit. And then finally, wanting to know more, and again, there's a few more things beyond this, but for today, kind of talking a little bit more about how folks can be involved in opportunities to participate. Some folks were interested in more on the permitting side. How can they get notices about permitting? Some folks were interested more in just how can we communicate some of the compliance stuff that we deal with. So with that, I'm going to share this. I might, again, I shared it in, if you want to open up the link that I sent you, it might help you zoom in and read it a little closer. But there's a lot to see on this slide. So I'll just orient you really quickly, and then I'm happy to just kind of stop talking. I'm just going to really quickly let you know that we kind of summarized the purpose that we felt, you know, through the sticky notes, a summary of those next steps that I just went through, and let you know that here on the left, we prioritized for NOx and PM 2.5 in order of emissions, the different types of sources. We laid out a schedule for the rest of the year that we think could help us dive into sort of the top sources, kind of in order, but knowing that some of the things weren't necessarily in the top sources, but were also important. And one example of that is that folks felt like they wanted to know more about ISR, for example. So that's one example here we have of being on the schedule as well. And then finally, the quarterly enforcement report is something that we plan to go over.
I'm sorry, what does the ISR stand for?
Sorry, great question. That is indirect source reviews. Okay. If you recall, that you, Mary, had about the rule that we have of development and how do we mitigate. Yep, there you go. Perfect. Yep. How do we mitigate or make sure that we're mitigating or offsetting or preventing emissions indirectly, right? So not necessarily that the source is causing the emissions, but the transportation. So yep, Mary Elizabeth is sharing her printout of that rule, which is great. I think maybe I'll stop sharing so people can look closer at what she's sharing, which is great.
That must be another air district's rule.
Yes, another air district.
Yeah. So anyhow, so
this is yours.
Yes, perfect. I'm going to share back on my screen. And oh, hi, Nate. I see you popped in probably while I was sharing my screen, so I didn't see you. So maybe I'll pause there. I'm happy to, I'll bring up my screen again just to kind of get thoughts on kind of the approach and next steps. And what we're looking for on this item right now is, does this general proposed schedule make sense? Even hearing from the CARB folks, is this something that we think we could work on together? I'll share my screen again. As you can see, based on the suggestion that we go sort of from higher emission source to sort of like less, we proposed to start with some of the mobile sources since they were kind of higher on the list, although knowing that maybe we can shift a few things around if that makes more sense for collaboration. One of the main questions, and it's lower on the list, but definitely a big question that folks had, and we wanted to put it on here, was in particular the biomass power plant and kind of reviewing rules there. One of the asks that you can see here in the bullets was to make sure not only do we review the applicable rules, but maybe we invite the folks there so they can be a part of the discussion. People suggested that we review any recent emissions violations, which we're happy to do. And then the main suggestion, which I thought was great, was to have the district walk through like maybe what an inspection looks like. We can even bring up and show what the tools we use are and do kind of something like that. And then we would kind of use that same format for kind of everything. We could go through the dust control rule, which is a big part of the PM 2.5 emissions. And then of course, even though it's not high on the emissions source list, like I mentioned at the beginning, ISR was something that we also wanted to discuss. And then just for full transparency, we put December/January just so that the committee has an option to figure out where a December meeting fits in. That tends to be another time that folks want to take a little time off. So yeah, I'll pause there and see if there's just any kind of initial thoughts about or questions about the proposed schedule. Maybe feedback as to other things we can add given time to maybe some of these discussions. Is there a point that you want to make sure is covered in each of these that we can make sure we include? Or any other thoughts? I'll stop talking.
Yeah, on your dust control, could you please add on there stockpiles? Because I saw a lot of uncovered stockpiles and a lot of dust. And then could you also add on their paved roads, public paved roads versus gravel roads,
Yes.
public? And look at you, Jonathan, so good to get your hand up there.
No, this is all great and definitely, I think, related. I think it's vague here, so I appreciate your asking for specificity, because and John and Mark know this really well because they're with our compliance team. Is the dust controls, both of what you just mentioned are related to dust control. So I think both of those are super applicable to that discussion. Jonathan, go ahead.
I know for October, there's the DTSC piece. Is there a way to also fit in Penny Newman
Yeah,
somewhere?
it's super possible. So Penny Newman, I think we were looking at going kind of emissions wise down the list. But I'm gonna add that to my list, and it's possible maybe as we design this meeting, we want to leave room, of course, right? For like, if there's a lot of questions about one, we don't want to fit too much. But what if we add it to the list and see as we create that agenda, if it fits and if that's something that folks are interested in. And then if not, we just create a new meeting and maybe that can be that could be kind of the main topic.
What is Penny Newman?
It's a grain processing business.
In the port area.
Okay. One of the things, Jonathan, that I think, and maybe this is where you're headed with it, that I heard from those of us that are on the Port Outreach Committee and interested in tracking the truck study that are on our truck committee as well, is traffic from Penny Newman seems to be, and I don't know if that's where you were going with it, Jonathan, or if you were talking about the actual processing itself. But we have heard feedback from preliminary results from their truck study that they're doing in the port, that a lot of the traffic is related, I think, to that particular facility. And from my understanding, they're not actually in the port. Is that true? Maybe I could be off base.
Yeah,
there.
they're not
Yeah.
port, they're a competitor to the port.
Right. And so from our understanding, so maybe that could be part of it. And the reason I'm bringing that up is maybe this is a full discussion, Jonathan, and maybe it's related to the discussion that comes out of the port's report about their truck traffic study. And
well, also, I mean, we're talking about the port. The port has oversight on all the other tenants, but it's like,
right.
We have also the Penny Newman, and their emissions might not be so much, but they also have to report to the district. It would be great to see their pollution index each year.
One of the things I can do, and I can even do it right now, is just for everyone to remind you all, we do report to you guys, and we post it online every year, all of the emissions from all of our stationary sources. And we have that map, if you recall, and I'll drop that in the chat here in a minute, but that map shows like spatially, I'm just unsharing so I can look at you all, shows sort of spatially where the different sources are, and you can click on it and it brings up the emissions. And so I'll drop that in the chat right now. So in the meantime, not to say that we won't have a discussion on it, but in the meantime, we can use that to kind of do our own little deep dive into the emissions.
And then Jessica, the two biggest bulk commodities at the port are cement and coal. And so, both of those have some issues related to dust, because the coal comes in from Utah in open rail cars. And I know that they have supposedly done some improvements on cement, but I guess this is it. When it comes down to it, I think that you all are like way too generous in your permits. And so, you know, if somebody is like, has increased their operations, you know, that there should be, you know, some related increase in, you know, enforcement. Because, you know, there's an increased throughput. And, you know, whenever you're increasing a throughput, you know, there's always, you know, some like sloppiness, you know, that happens. Because, you know, you're going at your maximum. And, you know, they were not very long ago, you know, planning on like a huge expansion that now is who knows where they are. And I don't know, you know, you guys, I mean, have you gotten anything new from Lehigh? They've kind of dropped off of the AB 617. Yeah.
I actually don't know how to answer that, so I might put that down as an action item, Mary. But
Okay.
From what I'm hearing though, and I totally hear you. So when we talk about dust controls, we'll definitely make sure not only to go just high level, like what are our dust control rules, obviously like what the folks need to do, but it sounds like maybe we can, and like I said, I'm glad we have our enforcement team here that's listening to all this. Maybe we can get together and pick an example. And like you said, maybe we pick one example of what you just shared, some sort of permit limit and what that means and what our process is to do that inspection and kind of what that can lead to. What happens if they're out of compliance? What do we require? What is the requirement to be in compliance? Kind of all of that. So there is kind of that understanding, and folks can ask those other questions.
And just a follow-up comment quickly, you know, is when you have all of these permitted facilities, you know, the cumulative impact, right? The cumulative impact. And I know, you know, that was definitely an issue that has come up on a number of occasions, you know, should be at the permitted limit, you know, not maybe what they're doing today, because they have been granted approval for that permitted limit.
So you're
And how much pollutants, right, can the air take in Stockton?
I think what she's saying is, so today there's five places operating, but tomorrow there's 10 places operating, and they're putting 2 times the number of stuff into the air. And maybe the next day 15 are operating. That's their operating day. And so it's going to be triple. And so some days there's going to be more air pollution, and the cumulative, it just gets out of hand. I get what you're saying.
Yeah, I do too. And I'm wondering, one of the things I wonder if we could do, and we'll grab our permits team, is I think a discussion, because I think Mary's point is so valid in that maybe it's not clear when we're talking about the emissions inventory, what are we talking about? Are we talking about actual? Are we like, just explain to folks what that inventory means? Meaning when we say we know this is what's coming off a facility, we can describe what that means. Is that what we measured as coming off? Is that what they report? Like there's a variety of different factors. And so I think that might help us get to both of your points about cumulative impact and what we're actually measuring, what we're actually reporting, and getting that kind of answered as well.
I have just a quick question or comment.
I'll go to Jonathan. Jonathan's your hand up.
Oh.
New. Okay, yeah, thank you. No, go ahead, Debbie, you go ahead and then I'll go.
I am really concerned that we, as a state, but as a county or as an air district, aren't making coal trains cover themselves. I'm just shocked. Is there Just because it's coming from a state that doesn't believe in that maybe so
Right.
much. I think once they cross the state
Right.
line, or once they cross our line, you put those covers on.
That's a great question. And obviously this is the benefit of being like this collaborative. We have our CARB folks here who I know, and Rachel is this whole thing where it's federal, not state, but like, so I'm wondering if Scott, can you maybe help us grab folks that can help answer that question? Because I don't even know from a district side, that's definitely not a district reg, but I'm even curious from a from a state side, or if you
I've
know.
got some contacts in our rail section, in our transportation and toxics division, that I can certainly ask that question and see if maybe it's even something we could do a quick, easy email response to, kind of a thing, or
Right.
if it's a little bit more of a longer explanation, maybe it becomes another sticky note that we put on this list.
Right.
And I don't know if Udo or Eric happen to have any insight that we could get immediate answers, I'd encourage you to pipe up. Otherwise, I'm happy to work directly with our rail division on that.
Thank you, Scott.
No, that's a great question. I'm writing that down as a question so we can keep track of it. I'll go ahead and start sharing my screen again, because I think that is super relevant. And obviously why we're here, so we can answer these questions and get them ahead of time.
Jonathan still has his hand
Oh yeah,
up.
sorry, Jonathan, sorry. I keep sharing my screen so I don't get to see all this. I appreciate it, Debbie. Thanks for the help. Jonathan,
You guys aren't just used to me coming here, huh? I'm just kidding.
no, this is great. We're happy. We're glad.
One other part I like to see is is it just the air district that oversees dust control when it comes to projects being done, or is it also an ordinance from the Stockton?
Mhm.
Because I feel like air district is one thing, but like, I feel like there are new projects that are happening that like City of Stockton has to also oversee.
Yeah.
But there's not sort of like hey, you're not doing the right thing. Like for instance, even in North Stockton, I mean, in North Stockton, there's the development of the apartment complexes that are there. And sometimes they do here and there put water on it, but there is a hill of dirt, loose dirt that gets spread because of the wind. There aren't any covers onto it. I live in Vacaville, okay? Vacaville is what, Bay Area Air District? Those suckers are covered. And I asked them, I literally came up to them and I asked them, I was like, why are those why are those covered? And they says the air district forces us to cover these. Like it's important. Like that's sort of a checklist that we have to follow. Why can't we do the same thing? Like these are actual sturdy covers. These aren't like trash bag covers. Why isn't that the same thing here in the Central Valley?
And maybe, John, can you give an overview? Because it's possible, Jonathan, that what you're describing means they might just be out of compliance, but John, can you give an overview, high level, knowing we're going to dig into it, and I appreciate the question, of like what our dust control rules are, and then maybe Mark, I'm going to make lots of little assignments. Mark, can you drop in the chat a link to maybe where all of our Reg 8 rules live?
Yeah, thanks, Jessica, and thanks, Jonathan. So sounds like that's a pile that would be subject to our bulk material rule. And in that rule, and Mark will drop the link so you guys can correct me if I'm misspeaking at all, but they must control the piles and make sure that visible dust doesn't exceed a certain opacity level. And there's multiple different measures that a operator of that bulk material can select to ensure that that doesn't happen. They can make sure that the surface is stabilized. They could cover it. There's a lot of different options that they could do to make sure that the material stays controlled and that visible dust limit doesn't get exceeded. So in the Bay Area Air Quality Management District, I'm not sure if they have the same requirement where it's optional, not optional to maintain that control, but they have the option to select what controls they wish to use to achieve that that cover or that stabilized surface or what have you. So
like, and maybe you were just getting to this, but say Jonathan sees this like huge, like it's clearly not controlled hypothetically, and he calls the air district and we go out and do inspection and we confirm does that mean they're in violation of the rule?
Right. Thanks, Jessica. For sure. If you saw a lot of dust being generated, Jonathan, you should absolutely turn in a complaint with us, and we'll go out there and investigate and do a visible dust evaluation. And if they violate that 20% standard that I was referring to, even if it's covered, even if it's stabilized, even if there's watering trucks on site, if they exceed that visible dust limit, then there'd be a violation of that rule.
20% of what?
It's an opacity measurement. It's somewhat hard to explain. It's like if you were to look through the plume of the dust with the sun at your back,
Okay.
is 20% of light getting through the dust, is 80% of light getting through. That's the opacity measurement. And the thicker the plume of dust, the higher the visible dust emissions are as a percent of opacity. So 100% opacity means that you cannot see any light through the dust.
Right.
The requirement in the rules is that they control the dust to not exceed 20% opacity. And there's a method that our inspectors are certified to. It's method 9, which they go out and they look at a smokestack that's ran by CARB typically, to make sure that our inspectors can measure using the naked eye what the different opacity levels are for various different smoke concentrations or dust concentrations. So we maintain certification to be able to do that determination in response to complaints like what we might receive based on what Jonathan's observing.
Thanks all, appreciate it.
Thank you,
thanks,
Jonathan. So a couple of things is, one, we took that note down so that when we do have the full meeting that is just about dust control, that can be one thing we go over in more detail. I also dropped in the chat, and one thing I want to do, and I'm curious, we don't have to spend time giving feedback on it now, but we might play with a few things, is making sure that this link that I just dropped about how to file a complaint is something that we regularly remind folks of, because I do think that's a big piece of some of this stuff. As we hear oftentimes from folks, kind of like they'll come to a meeting and say, last week I saw this, I think it was Saturday, I think it was at this corner. But if we know and we can like document, it helps us go out there immediately and be able to see it. It's really difficult for Mark's team to go out today if you saw it last Saturday and know if the dust was as described. So I think it's important. It'll help us, at least if people just know kind of the various ways they can file. So we'll make sure that's part of this schedule as well.
And I think
we don't have anybody in Stockton, and to just go out and look. And it's the same thing like odor, right? Something could be happening right then, because I filled out those forms myself, and not had a satisfactory response. I mean, we contacted the wastewater treatment plant. They didn't get back to us. Right. Okay. And I call, and I talk with my neighbors. You smell it. So it's just not my, overactive olfactory, sensitivity.
Mm-hmm.
And, and Mark, it's not your fault, right, that you guys are not in Stockton, but I'm just wondering, how many more complaints are validated in Modesto than Stockton? And I think that's a valid question.
And we could find that out for you, Mary. That's a good question for sure. Like a comparison between the number of complaints confirmed in Stockton versus Modesto. That's something we can absolutely provide for you.
And I think we're open to getting to using that info right together to see if maybe there's some alternative to make sure we are responsive, because I know we do, like, you're right, we do get out there as quick as possible, but as quick as possible is obviously quicker in Modesto than Stockton, and that's a really fair point.
And it comes up at a certain time of the afternoon, evening, and I at first thought it was my neighbor not picking up their dog mess, but because that's what it smells like. But it's about between 4 and 7:30, 8 o'clock, I would say. maybe even 5 o'clock to 8 o'clock. So I don't know.
And
If
I would
that
add, sorry, Debbie, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I would just add that regarding response time between Modesto and Stockton, for example, our inspectors that investigate complaints that we receive don't leave from Modesto necessarily. We have, all their trucks have GPS installed on them. And so when we receive a complaint, our supervisors will look at who's closest, what inspectors are in the field, and whoever is closest to the complaint location, that inspector gets assigned to investigate. So it's as prompt as it can be based on who the nearest inspector is. And we treat complaint investigations as the top priority. So that inspector might be in the middle of a regular routine inspection at DTE Stockton or wherever a facility permitted in the Stockton area. They'll drop that and go and respond to the complaint once they see that the assignment's been given to them. And then go get back to the facility inspection when they're done with their complaint investigation. But that's the priority for us.
I appreciate all of this feedback in developing these agenda items. So my thought is, I'm hearing lots of great feedback on each individual one, which we definitely need. And I wonder if we can just continue to build on that, like month by month. We just open up the schedule, just say, hey, by the way, before we finish the presentation for next month, what else do you want to know? But in general, it sounds like the schedule makes sense to folks. And I'll just share my screen again, although if you click on the link, it should be live, so you can kind of see all the notes I've taken. But if this schedule for now, obviously it will continue to grow. This isn't everything, and we'll continue to add to it. But we can, like I said, month by month, if someone says, oh, by the way, maybe it comes up casually in conversation that they had more questions or more input on the ISR rule discussion, more than just, so far we've already talked about, we want to look at the applicability, discussion of similar rules like South Coast's rule, but maybe other things come up. We can continue to add sticky notes that will help us design each of these meetings. So yeah, I'm happy to, from there, you guys have this, and I'm happy to even have you, I'll screen capture what we have now, but even if you want to kind of go through and read this on your own and have other thoughts or questions, we'll take that.
I'm wondering if more people are interested, I can understand why we would do the number of, the NOx numbers first, the highest first. And I guess dust isn't too far down the road. But I'm just thinking that maybe we could move that up, but I guess we could probably rearrange it a little bit, like you said earlier.
Yeah, we're happy to move dust. It might make sense actually, typically like the windy time. I know it's maybe the wind is a little different in Stockton than it is like the rest of the valley. I know you guys do get a delta breeze, but it does tend to be windier in the fall. So we can move it to where it's a little more time relevant. And so maybe I'll just kind of share my screen again. It's possible we just slide it right into, maybe we just flip-flop it with this one, or we can slide it here and move things down. I don't know if there's no preference right now. Maybe we can just make adjustments to this and send out the final, but maybe right now we can just propose to flip-flop these. So that way in October, which actually tends to be our windiest time, would be a time folks can really be in, hopefully not the thick of it, but kind of during that time of year, we can get really deep into that dust control discussion.
Yeah.
Cool. I will note that as well.
I looked at, I put in a public information request on DTE, and I was looking through the material. I haven't summarized it yet myself, but I did notice that when there is a notice of violation noted, in an inspection report, I missed at least one actual follow through on that. And so I thought that we were supposed to be having, and this is DTE, I thought that we were supposed to be having enhanced inspections. And in fact, I think the last inspection was just record keeping, you know, and it said records, you know, and so I'm just wondering, you know, like it really clarifying on, you know, what that means, you know, and I know that question has come up, you know, so if we could have, you know, there's not so many stationary sources, you know, in Stockton. I mean, in the AB 617 area, because that's all we're, you know, able to review, right, with this intensity. Yeah.
I mean, that's the goal, right? What impacts the AB 617 area, right?
Right. I mean, you know, those that are right outside, you know, also are impacting, but you know, that's the focus for that measure, you know, for the SERP.
Right.
And so there's not that many. So if we could have a list of those with the inspection dates and the planned inspection dates, and you know, I think going over that information earlier on would be better, so that you know folks can become educated, so that you know they can go out, we can go out, you know, our community activists can go out and do those public information requests and kind of, you know, double check on, you know, like what's going on, you know, in this facility.
So I think that's a great idea. I'm going to transition here in a second to go over our quarterly report, which does include that. I'll reflect too. We put out, and we are about to, within the next month or so, do another one. We put out our annual report last year. And as was requested by you all, instead of just doing a document, we did an Excel sheet that has, I think, exactly what you just asked for, which is a list of every facility in the boundary.
Yeah.
The number of violations within the reporting period. And so you can even sort it from how many to how few. All of the inspections we did at each facility, any violations of the rules and any complaints we heard. And we summarize it here, of course, but you can go through here, go to the facility. You can even go and try to find the facility that you're referencing.
DTE.
So, for example, exactly, if you go to DTE, which actually, does it have a longer name? I'm going to be a little bit.
It was right at the top, Jessica, because you sorted by violations.
Thank you. Because I sorted by violations. Yes, good points.
So not the top, but it was.
See, I should have done it by.
Yeah, just sort by alphabetical.
Oh, here it is, DTE Stockton. So it had 2, and so and then you can go over to actually what those violations were, I think, by also searching for DTE Stockton here. And actually see what those were for. And so from my understanding, and maybe, can you walk me through, Mark and John, are these emissions violations, or what are these types of violations?
Those would be administrative violations for failing a CO2 calibration, for example. That doesn't mean that there was additional CO2 emitted. It means that a calibration was failed. And so when they recalibrated and passed calibration, then that took care of that administrative violation. And then also the failure to submit a deviation report, that's an administrative violation as well.
So just to review, our enhanced inspection frequency is only for sources, stationary sources within the boundary that have emissions violations anytime in the past 3 years. And so are they, Mark, is DTE on that list for enhanced inspection frequency?
Yes, they are on a 6-month frequency.
Perfect. So every 6 months they get an inspection rather than every 2 or every just once a year.
When does that start?
That
It's already
started.
ongoing.
Yep, that started 2 or 3 years ago, right? Or a year ago. Sorry, I'm getting confused with our other. That started when we adopted the SERP last year.
And just to share, our last inspection was in February of this year, and the 6-month inspection interval triggers our next inspection to be in August, so next month.
And are you going to do other than in administrative, are you going to actually collect samples? Or, look, or, I'm just like wondering, like we were out there and saw, and so this, I guess, is another thing, when there's lots of places in the port, where we can't even get to. Right. And so, and not even able, there's only, like one place and you can't even see on the other side unless you actually want to trespass on the north side, to like look across the river, because for some reason state lands completely let people, like take up all, there's no public access anymore.
Right.
And so, you can't even like look and see across the water. And so we saw like the so-called plume, right? And the steam plume, right? But then there was like coming from the big stack, but then there was like an auxiliary stack exhaust. And so I guess when we do talk about those stationary, I think that it would, if it's something that someone can go and see to, monitor, that to understand what their process is.
Yep.
Yeah,
And
this would
I
be
know,
very-
like I smelled things that are like wood related, and I don't know, if it has to do with the, the grinding that they do across the way.
I was just gonna add,
Just the piles that were off-gassing some, volatile that was in the wood product.
thanks, Mary. I was just gonna add that I think this is a great example of how helpful this forthcoming meeting can be when we talk about stationary sources and how they're inspected. We can absolutely highlight DTE if that's of interest, and go through the permits and show you how we measure emissions if they have equipment that we would probe to measure emissions for, and what the difference between an administrative violation and a emissions violation would be. We can absolutely get into that information.
And I've noted all this down. And I think this is also super great. So and like I said, because we're going to now swap this, we have a little bit of time to keep adding. So as we even keep meeting the next few months, if something else comes up from any of you about DTE or the dust control discussion or ISR, we can keep adding to this list, and it will help us at the district craft the discussions. But I did want to take a second, since it's already 4:47, this discussion is super helpful for us, to see if there was interest in having Mark go through the high level quarterly report that just came out. He can also drop it in the chat, whatever you all want. And we also, like I said, wanted to share really briefly, and it might just be a drop in the link and explain what it is and look for feedback at another time, that big document that has like all of the control sources for every type of source. So are we okay? Like thumbs up to let Mark kind of high level go through the enforcement report? Cool.
All right, I'll try to do it kind of quickly since I know we're running a little short on time, but let's see, let me pull it up here. Where'd it go? Sorry, I had too many screens open. Okay, so for the second quarter of 2022, I just kind of wanted to take you guys through kind of our enforcement efforts from April 1st through June 30th. And the first category I kind of wanted to go over is our efforts relating to fugitive dust, which is covered through our Regulation 8 series of district rules. So our CERP commitment is that we were going to do an extra targeted enforcement effort during the second and third quarters of each year, because it tends to be the driest time of year when there's going to be the most dust generated from, construction and earth moving activities. So this quarter we inspected 10 construction project sites within the boundaries of the community. We did not observe any violations during those inspections. And then in addition to those inspections, we did receive one dust complaint during this quarter. Also, we have our anti-idling diesel enforcement. So our commitment is that we do a targeted enforcement effort each quarter. We did that this quarter. We did not find any idling diesels in violation during this effort, and we also did not receive any public complaints regarding idling diesels within the community for this quarter. As we kind of went over, we have a commitment to do an increased inspection frequency at any facility which has received an emission-related violation within the previous 3 years. So that's the previous 3 years of when the community was formed, and then also ongoing as we do inspections. If we find an emissions violation, we immediately set that to a 6-month frequency moving forward. So for this quarter, we did 37 total stationary source inspections. Of those, 35 were routine compliance inspections and 2 were source test observations, where I think we kind of went over it a little bit last time, but as a reminder, that's when a third-party certified contracting company goes to the site to actually do emissions testing on a permitted unit there. And that's where they actually gather data and go through kind of a rigorous testing procedure, which they then have to submit to us. And so when possible, we like to go and observe that testing when it happens in the field. So in addition to the inspections, we issued 11 violations within the boundaries of the community this quarter, 4 of which were for emission-related rule violations. During the quarter, we had 7 public complaints that were within the boundaries of the community, 5 of which regarded residential open burning, 1 was for odor, and 1 was the previously mentioned fugitive dust complaint. And again, there's some information here about how to submit complaints, but just to kind of reiterate what was said earlier, we do appreciate when you guys send in complaints, and when you notice something happening, the sooner you can let us know, the better, just to make sure that we can get out there while it's still occurring. So that kind of concludes the kind of high-level overview.
Mark, let me ask you a question real quick.
Sure.
On those inspections, 4 were emissions related. Do you know offhand who those were? They
yeah, I can find out for you right now. Let me pull up a different screen.
Mark, yeah, keep pulling that up. I think that's a great question, and we'll let Mark answer that. One of the things that that spreadsheet that I shared with you, we will be compiling that for the entire year and sending that out to you all within the next couple of months as we compile our typical sort of annual report, which usually happens in about October. So you'll have a list of any of the violations that happened, also in addition to him answering your question, but I just wanted you all to know that.
So will that be updated then? Like every quarter or every kind of
Right
like?
now the plan is to update that, like the big spreadsheet in our annual report. But we're happy to amend if we need this quarterly report. It was intended, folks gave us feedback last year when we started doing these quarterly reports about making them like succinct, and so we're open to different things.
I like this.
So I can go ahead and share my screen with a little more detailed data on those violations. So this is the violations that were issued in the community. So this first one here was to an auto body shop for failing to submit an emission inventory for all the coatings they used in the year 2020. That's an administrative violation because it's a report. It doesn't mean that they necessarily were using anything non-compliant. It just means they didn't provide us with the records that we requested. This complaint here, this is to a gas station for failing to maintain their vapor recovery system. So they had torn torn hoses installed on nozzles number 5 and 6. So this is actually 2 violations because it was 2 separate nozzles. That is emissions related.
Mhm.
The next one here, Tiger Soul Products, failure to maintain their scrubber liquid pH above minimum requirement of 10 during operation. That one would be considered emissions related, potentially. It doesn't mean it necessarily was, but it definitely had the potential to be. So I would categorize that as emissions related. So that facility is now on a 6-month inspection frequency, as is the gas station noted above. Going down, this is another record violation. Again, administrative. This one was operating without a permit. That's also going to be administrative. Failure to submit a source test within 6 days of testing. That is, again, administrative. They didn't fail their source test. They just simply didn't get us the results within the required time frame. Another emissions inventory one, which is administrative. Open burn of trash and miscellaneous material. This was actually a result of one of the complaints that was sent in, which is why we appreciate when complaints do come in, because this one was confirmed and a violation was issued for the illegal open burn. And then just closing out here with 2 more administrative paperwork violations.
So Dameron is right here in the middle of, and they have an incinerator, yeah?
I have to look. I'm not sure completely offhand what their equipment is. But they this violation specifically was for, not admitting or not submitting requested paperwork.
They did it twice. They're on here twice.
Yeah, I believe.
Did you give them like
Oh.
30 days or?
You know what it is? Yeah, the first one was a notice to comply.
Mhm.
And then the second one would have been a notice violation.
And then they would receive fines.
For the notice of violation, yes, that's correct.
And then do you have a list of standard fines that you use, or?
I think that's
No,
on question.
good question, Mary. We don't have a standard fines. We typically consider how recalcitrant a facility is. Do they have a lot of violations that they're receiving, in which case the penalty amounts go up. And there's also other considerations. For example, if they've avoided paying permit fees for a number of years, like one of these NOVs is for failing to get district permits before installing or operating an equipment that would have required permits. And so those avoided permit fees for however many years that equipment may have been installed is also considered in the settlement penalty. So there's a number of factors that we have a team of specialists here in the area district and in the compliance department that look at all those different factors and issue the penalty on a case-by-case basis.
So, I guess that would be also information to include on your spreadsheet, to like be fully transparent on, like what were any fines issued. And then the other thing, is on those citizen complaints, I think, there's not so many, like 3 sentences, a short paragraph, like, when did you receive it? When did you follow up? How did you follow up? That whole business, like, I don't even bother, to like put in an odor complaint on the wastewater treatment plant. When, like, it's very obvious what the wastewater treatment plant smell is like when it comes through. And so, because you're gonna call them, I got what I saw, like I clicked on that, that I wanted to get the feedback. And, it says they don't respond, like if they're not going to respond, they don't also, by the way, just for your information, track odor complaints on the wastewater treatment plant in their municipal utilities report that they have to do quarterly for the water advisory group. All they track is odor complaints on water.
I'm going to share really quickly because I think it's what you're it sounds like maybe what you were asking for, and we can amend this. This is again that annual report that had that tab that has complaints. And in this report, it has the complaint description, the type, the potential responsible party, the date and exact time we received, the resolution description, so what happened afterwards, so, you know, whether it was referred to someone because it wasn't related to, you know, in this case, it was referred to health and safety or police department, whether an NOV was issued because of a violation of a rule. So maybe is this kind of what you were looking for?
Well, you know, like a time, you know, a time frame. So maybe, you know, maybe it's something, you know, that you don't include here, but I know that there was somebody just about this one, you know, that got really up in arms because you had included people's names and addresses, if you recall, you know, so related to the fireplace complaints, you know, so I don't know, you know, like if you really want to do that, you know, because there does seem like it's, you know, I don't know what the rules are on
Private
that,
information,
but
that sort of thing. Yeah, no,
Yeah.
this is all great feedback. So just because it is 5 o'clock, we've heard such great feedback, and I think it's going to help us with our schedule. It helps, I think, Mark and John and their team with some stuff. I know that CARB is obviously here listening. They have a couple of action items. And so I'll just end really briefly. It is in the agenda for today. I'm going to go straight to it right now. I dropped the agenda in earlier, but let me know if you need me to drop it in again. And I'm clicking on, and I'll also drop this direct link in the chat. This is something we compiled last year. We ended up posting it, but then like because of timeline, and by the time we were developing the SERP, we kind of just went straight into SERP development, but we created it as an appendix to the SERP. And it is a very detailed, so we're happy to amend and make it a little more readable document that's organized by source type. And within each source type, for example, biomass, it goes over each of the rules that the biomass facility is subject to. We do recognize, though, that from here, then you click on it and then it takes you directly to the rule, which is, I think, if you're not used to reading district rules, is cumbersome to understand what each of these does. And so our proposal or our offer to you, and it's not, hopefully folks are, oops, I don't even know how to get back to where I was. Maybe I just go back. There we go. Our offer to you is for us to get some feedback if something like this, but a little more streamlined, is something that you would all find helpful, like a little guidebook on how to go and understand what rules each of these facilities is subject to, what it means. Maybe we just provide a few extra details or sentences on each of these. Another quick example, and we don't need to get details and feedback right now. We'll send this out again to folks. But the dust rules, this is the list of each of them and what is needed, but maybe we can provide some more details. We're happy to amend this to make it like a usable kind of user guide for you all as we go through this process with this subcommittee. So if that sounds generally like something that you're okay with and you're willing to help us get quick feedback on, we'll take it upon ourselves to start with this, maybe take one crack at making it a little more streamlined and not so heavy of a document like you have to read a whole book, and then just continue, maybe save some time on the agenda at the next meeting or two to get feedback from the group, if that's okay with everyone.
That sounds good.
Awesome.
I'm not quite sure what you want me to review, so
I just put it in the chat, and it was in the agenda as well. But this document that I just dropped in the chat, and I'm happy to, maybe we can share it with the group in the meeting again, is a document that it sort of answers, we think, but not very streamlined, the question that came up last meeting of, can we get like a guide on all of the different rules and regulations? So this document that I was just clicking through, and it's the one that's in that link that you have, does that, but it's really long. And so we were just offering, if there's feedback on what folks think is useful about this document or not useful, we can amend it or make a streamlined version of it that we can then distribute out to folks as a guide to understand what rules and regulations apply to which sources. And this is specific to Stockton. We exclusively found the sources that were in Stockton when we created this.
And also, you know, like, I think it would be good is, since you put down in there about the tune up, tune in, you know, like those statistics on, you know, how that went. I know you just had one.
Yeah,
This
we're happy to
past
share that. I
weekend.
think that's part of our maybe one of our updates at the upcoming meeting is just kind of generally how things.
And I don't see E-Trip, and you know, I've got a bug in my bonnet about that.
E-Trip is on here. I believe it's on page 6, so it might be right below the next page down. But
Well,
yeah,
I looked at the schools, right? Page 6.
page 6. So anyhow, all of this is great feedback. Maybe we could call out E-Trip a little bit better. There's a section here about E-Trip, but maybe.
Oh yeah, I see it there. No links
maybe,
though, huh?
But maybe to your point, we can have more, again, this is why we get this feedback. We created this in March of last year, 2021. So it's been a while and we haven't, I think we were using it for a different purpose. So making it more link friendly, and this is already just great feedback, so. Awesome. This is so great. We had I think a lot of great feedback. We will continue to get that feedback. We will work with CARB on the next few meetings on coordinating some of the on-road and off-road reg discussions, and continue to get feedback from you on all of the other discussions. And I just want to thank you for your time, and be grateful that you gave us extra 6 minutes of your day, and hope you have a great night.
All right, you too. All
Everybody.
right, stay cool, drink
Thank
plenty
you.
water.
Yes,
Have a great night.
I
Bye.
totally agree. Thank you, Debbie. I really appreciate you. Yeah.
I appreciated you handling this meeting. Do we want to try to set a tentative date?
Yes, I think we should. I will have, Stephanie is out, but I will work with Eric, I think, or not Eric, sorry, Eric Bissinger is the one on here, but Eric on my team, to work with you to set up a date. And what we'll do is we'll maybe look that, I'm glad you said that, because that could have been a good, maybe we get a doodle out to this group and see what
days are available. Yeah.
Let's do that.
Because Tuesdays here in Stockton are city council meetings.
Okay.
And then Wednesdays, we've got our meetings.
Right.
So I don't want to jam you.
I know, and there's a whole
so
back and forth. Well, we're happy. We can kind of amend, we can play it by ear and see what works. We might have to play with a couple of different dates and times.
Yeah, we might have to move it around. I mean,
Yeah, exactly. If whatever works.
people are so busy. Yeah.
Exactly. Well,
Okay.
we're happy that you made time for us, and we appreciate you. I hope everything
Everything
well.
slow down. I just keep telling myself this too shall pass,
Yes.
and
Yes.
I'll get through it.
Yeah. Well,
I'm just trying to smile through it. So not too much, but smile.
Well, I appreciate your attitude and your support. And I hope you have a really great week.
You too.
All right.
Thank you. Yeah. Bye-bye.